Israel and Iran have now appeared to back away from further escalation, just hours after the two nations exchanged fire for the first time since the U.S. brokered April truce. Axios cites two Israeli officials who say Israel was preparing for the biggest wave of strikes on Iran since the ceasefire took hold, when President Trump called Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and asked him to stop the strikes. The president told Axios, quote, "I said, Bibi, you better be careful or you will be on your own very soon." After the call, the outlet reports Netanyahu told his senior military commanders to cancel the strikes. Both Israel and Iran, however, have signaled they are ready to resume attacks at a moment's notice. The Iranian military's joint command said further, quote, aggression and hostile acts by Israel and its supporters, including in southern Lebanon, would be met with much more severe and crushing measures than before. Israel has continued deadly strikes there this morning, killing at least 12 people, including 8 in a residential area. Netanyahu warned if Iran, quote, makes the mistake and returns to attacking us, we will respond with force, adding Israel, quote, has full right to self-defense and we will exercise it to the full extent necessary. There's new polling that takes a look at how Americans feel about the impact of the war in Iran so far. The latest University of Maryland Critical Issues poll finds that 56% believe the war has had a more negative than positive impact on U.S. interests. Even among Republicans, more say the impact has been negative than positive. On the question of who is winning the war, 38% say neither side is winning. Just 39% of Republicans and 16% of Americans overall say the United States is winning or has won the war. A key piece of President Trump's 2024 campaign was no new wars. You guys remember this. NBC's Kristen Welker asked him about that during their interview last week.
One of your consistent campaign promises was no new wars, going all the way back to 2015. Did you break that promise to the American people?
No. I had to stop a country, very powerful, very dangerous country, from having a nuclear weapon.
What changed? Because you insisted no new wars.
First of all, I didn't guarantee no war. Why would I have built the strongest military in the world? I built our military. I inherited a terrible military. We had no equipment. We had nothing. I built a tremendous military. Biden gave a lot of it away, but it's still a relatively small portion compared to what I built.
But you said it over and over again, Mr.
Why would I build a military?
The thing is, there's a lot of video of him from 2024 saying some version of no wars or no new wars. Take a look.
So we are going to make sure there's no wars. We don't want to have wars. I call them endless wars. With our victory in November, the years of war, weakness, and chaos will be over. I don't have wars. We had no wars. I could stop wars with a telephone call. I could stop wars with just a telephone call. If properly stated, it would never start. No more wars, no more disruptions. We will have prosperity and we will have peace. Under Trump, we will have no more wars, no more disruptions, and we will have prosperity and peace for all. Viktor Orban said, if Trump comes back, you won't have any wars. You won't have any wars. And he's about as tough as they get. And he said it loud and clear. And he said, why? They said, he will start a war. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars.
Those darn cameras. Let's bring in MS Now White House reporter Akayla Gardner. Akayla, thank you for getting up with me this morning. We'll get to the broken promises of it all, but President Trump and Netanyahu had this phone call. One of the things that I have found very interesting for years is that presidents have found that relationship very frustrating, right? You had Bill Clinton, who famously said, when after having a meeting with Netanyahu, who was the superpower here? What did you make of this call? And more importantly, what do your sources in the White House say?
One thing that's important to underscore is these two men talk all the time. I don't put too much stock in any one call. Netanyahu said himself that he speaks to President Trump basically once every 2 days. So the fact that these men are talking this often and yet there's still so much tension tells you that even though President Trump is petitioning Netanyahu, he's still going to do what he wants and what he feels is in the best interest of Israel. That is no more complicated in a place like Lebanon, where Israel feels like they have a shorter runway to eradicate Hezbollah, which is frankly their goal. And Iran continues to show that this is something that they are taking seriously. They are not trying to make these two separate issues. They want fighting to stop on all fronts, including inside Iran and on Lebanon. That makes this incredibly difficult. This is the reason why Iran launched those strikes on Tel Aviv. And Israel needs assurances. I think they want assurances that the U.S. is going to continue to back them up. But as you heard President Trump saying, you might be on your own. That was his message to Netanyahu. He's clearly in a position now where he wants to get out of this war, and he doesn't want to let Israel and Netanyahu stop him.
What's interesting is Israel is not at the table for these negotiations between the United States and Iran as they are trying to hammer out an actual ceasefire deal.
Exactly. I mean, and these are two countries that got in this war together, right? Those February 28th strikes came as a result of Netanyahu pitching to President Trump, we have this opportunity to take out the supreme leader. And clearly things didn't go as planned. President Trump talked about on that day wanting a regime change. That has not happened. And I think he's in a position now where he has to spin this in a win some way. And it's really hard to do that when, again, there is no regime change, when the details that we continue to hear sound a lot like the JCPOA that the president pulled out of in 2018. And I think it bears reminding, we're talking about 6,900 people at least that have died. How can he justify that amount of death, that amount of fighting that has happened for a deal that looks a lot like Obama's, which he continues to be very critical of? I think that's why he's pushing for the Abraham Accords and looking for other wins, but it's really hard to see that happening right now in terms of a deal that doesn't look like the old one.
Yeah, even some Republicans I talked to are like, we were probably going to end up in the same place, essentially, that we were before this war started. President Trump also amplifying baseless claims of election fraud in California. As vote counts show, his endorsed candidate, Spencer Pratt, has been defeated in the Los Angeles mayoral race. Trump took to social media just yesterday, writing in part, quote, "Not possible for Spencer Pratt to have lost the LA runoffs after the big lead he had. Rigged elections, exclamation point." Instead of Pratt, progressive city council member Nithya Raman has advanced to the November runoff against Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass after extending her lead over Pratt by nearly 22,000 votes. Vice President J.D. Vance, of course, backed Trump's claims yesterday, saying in an interview the primary appeared, quote, "pretty shady," without providing, of course, any evidence. California's slow vote counting process, driven by the state's heavy reliance on mail voting, delays final results. We've seen this before and gives Trump additional time to make his unsubstantiated claims. House Speaker Mike Johnson is also backing President Trump's claims that California's election results are raising questions, even as he stopped short of calling it rigged. Johnson was repeatedly asked by CNN what evidence exists to support claims of fraud. This is what he said.
The president keeps saying that there's election fraud in the California mayoral race. What evidence is there to prove that?
You tell me, Manu. They are counting votes weeks after the election. We have entire nations with huge populations, like India, that can count their votes in 24 to 48 hours.
You're saying it's rigged like the president?
I'm not saying it's rigged. I'm saying it stinks to high heaven, and everybody knows that.
But what evidence is there to prove that there was rigged?
Look, some of these efforts are so diabolical and so far upstream it is impossible to prove. But I think everybody knows instinctively something is wrong here.
Everyone does not instinctively know that something is wrong here because there isn't. Since February 1st, 2016, Donald Trump, whenever he loses, whether his candidate loses, if he just doesn't like the outcome of an election, he has cried foul. He has said that it is fraud and said that cheating has happened. This feels like a clear example of what we're going to see as we head into November.
This is increasingly becoming a litmus test for Republicans. The president is basing his support for Republicans on whether they back this lie that there's widespread voter fraud. There's just simply no evidence of that. And something I think is interesting with this LA mayor's race is Spencer Pratt certainly outperformed the percentage of Republicans who are in Los Angeles. We are talking about an overwhelmingly Democratic city, so this is not surprising. And it's also interesting because Spencer Pratt tried to distance himself from Donald Trump in many ways. He acknowledged that he voted for him in the past, but he's aware of the dynamics in his own city. President Trump, even when he was asked by a reporter if he supported him, he said, "Does he support me?" And the reporter said, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, I guess I support him." He, in a lot of ways, tried to embody President Trump's candidate, and he is pushing a false lie now that homeless people cast votes, something that sounds very similar to President Trump saying immigrants cast votes for Democrats. So in a lot of ways, he modeled his campaign like Donald Trump, even though he tried to create this distance. But Republicans could frankly say he performed better than a lot of people expected. They could spin this as a win, but President Trump does not like anything less than outright winning. And obviously, Spencer Pratt is not doing that in this situation.
When you look at the midterm strategy for this White House, this feels like a big part of it. What doesn't feel like a big part of it is President Trump sticking to the script. I've talked to folks in and around him who say that we want him to be talking about Friday's job numbers, good job numbers that the President of the United States should be only talking about as the days go on, and yet we haven't heard that much of it. Are folks in the White House's political team, are they saying, yeah, we need him to get our message, or do they just care if the team is on message?
No, we've talked about this before. They want Republicans, they want the president's surrogates to be on message. They've kind of just been resolved in the fact that they can't control President Trump. They kind of say, let Trump be Trump. But something that I want to talk about today is Speaker Mike Johnson is meeting with President Trump, and they're expected to talk about Bill Pulte. That's somebody that I think Democrats and Republicans are concerned about how he could use that post potentially to interfere in elections this year. That remains to be seen if he will actually take that position and whether Republicans in Congress will support him. But I think there's a lot of people that are concerned that people in the administration, potentially election deniers in state and local offices, could go this route. It's something that we just have yet to see, but there's certainly a lot of concern there.
Bill Pulte, the new acting director of national intelligence with no national security experience. MS Now White House reporter Kayla Gardner. Always good to see you, my friend.